So let's go ahead and get started then. I don't even have like a beginning. How do you even start this? Uh, how do you do?
Experiment,
All right,
Felipe. Go with it, honey.
we'll,
Just
we'll
go with
have
it.
we'll have fun. So
Yeah.
um, my name is Felipe Hinojosa. I'm the editor at LatinxTalk, and it is a great privilege of mine to introduce you all. Although maybe you all already know who she is. She is Professor Martha Gonzalez. She is a Chicana Artivista musician and feminist music theorist. She is an assistant professor in the Intercollegiate Department of Chicana and Chicano and Latino and Latina Studies at Scripps College. Her awards are many and recognitions are many as well. She is a Fulbright scholar, a Ford Fellow, and a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, as well as lead singer for the Grammy Award winning band Quetzal. And really, just from what I'm reading and getting to know, an amazing human being. She is a trained scholar in feminism with a focus on Chicana feminist theory, transnational studies, performance studies, and ethnomusicology. Folks, I could go on and on. She's amazing. It's really an honor to have you with us today, Professor Gonzalez, here at Latinx Talk.
Thank you so much for having me, Professor
Great, great.
Costa.
You can call me Felipe.
Okay,
All
okay.
right. So we are here. We are here to talk about your new book. The title of the book is Chicano Artivistas: Music, Community, and Transborder Tactics in East Los Angeles, published by University of Texas Press, just this year in 2020. Professor Gonzalez, the book is fantastic. Thank you again for making time to talk to us today about your book and to help promote it here on our website with Latinx Talk. I'm going to just jump right in, and uh, you begin the book with what I think is a beautiful and poignant story about your father. And I wonder if you could begin there at the beginning here, and by asking how it was that your father's own story, his longing really for musical success, as you note, shaped you and prepared you for the work that you accomplish in this book that you just published.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to not just you, Professor Hinojosa, but also all the colegas that create spaces like these to discuss our work. It's really important, and I feel it's a privilege to be here with you, and that you all even take interest in our work is important, and I want to recognize that first. Um, yeah, like a lot of people and a lot of scholars, I start off from a very personal place, right? My early childhood experience in music, most of which was informed by my father. He's an immigrant from Guadalajara, Jalisco, who really was influenced by his time, and I make that clear throughout. But what I mean by influence is that he really had a longing. He was a creative person, He was a singer, a very good singer, actually sounded a lot like Javier Solis, or he fashioned his voice in that way. He was the guy to imitate of the times. And Jorge Negrete as well. And so my dad, when he arrived here, he was young. He must have been like 16, 17 years old, and really still had that longing for music and to be a professional musician. And, I think that migration is done out of necessity. He, like many of his time, were, you know, um, economic refugees, right? They're running from not very many opportunities in where he was from, and in coming over here, he kind of followed his mom, who had left many years before to work, and so. But he still brought his dreams with him, right, of being a professional ranchera singer. And unfortunately for my dad is that he never, what they call, nunca se acopló, right? And he never got used to this life. He never really fit in. He never finished high school. He kind of tried to, he enrolled in, but he never really finished. Everything about this culture was very foreign to him. Love happened. He met my mom. It was kind of a shotgun wedding. He started having a family before he knew it. And before he knew it, there were four of us. And, but it never, subsided his need for the dream, right? To be a professional singer, and all that came with, right? Economic and social prestige, you know, economic wealth, social prestige. And unfortunately for a lot of folks, and not to mention coming from a household that was traumatic, he was traumatized and then he became an alcoholic, right? Alcoholism became his thing. And he sort of, I think, built a world around what this meant, the world of professional music. But in and around his dabbling in alcohol, and then my brother growing up, and suddenly he realized that my brother had some sort of musical talent, he begins to recognize that, he vicariously begins to live through my brother's successes, right? So that's kind of where the book starts. And I'm really looking at, in that's kind of like a micro look at what I'm looking at, right? The micro look and the stories I tell throughout are about the change of music conception over time, right? For somebody like me, these are my early music memories that slowly begin to be, that were traumatic in a lot of ways, very informative and culturally very rich, but also traumatic, and a different way of seeing music that in retrospect, after all of these other experiences I have throughout in my life and community, not just in the trenches of East LA, but also in Chiapas, Mexico, and Veracruz, all the ways in which my father's belief system begin to be undone. So it's change of music conception over time. And that's like the micro look at all the different stories and the narratives I tell throughout. But I think that when you zoom out, the big picture, or the macro look, is really a critique on capitalism, right? And how it has fundamentally altered what I believe, it has fundamentally altered how we think about ourselves as creative beings, how it's overdetermined by capital and consumption, and how that has intrinsically affected how we relate to each other, right?
Yeah.
So in essence, we know that capitalism has had a global breakdown of cultures and people and communities, but we never really stop to think about how it has individually affected us, and how mass migration and wars and all the ways in which capitalism has had its bearing and its way with us, right? That these practices that we have let go have been detrimental to us spiritually and emotionally, to the point where we are sort of blinded with all these other things that capital sells us, right? And so my goal is to get the reader to realize, I guess, to sort of maybe ignite a kind of appetite for participatory music and dance practices, which I call them throughout. And then I describe different methods and how these community experiences gave way to these methods that I now utilize. So.
So that's great. One of the things that I really admired about what you did in the book is that you were able to weave really well, and probably better than a lot of folks, is the way that you weave theory and narrative and storytelling. You do that quite well. And I wonder, how is there any relation to music and making music to the writing process of that sort of kind of eclectic mix? Because people often do theory and think, well, there's no storytelling that can go with it, or it's void of story, or vice versa, where you have a story but no sort of theory to help us understand the story. And I wonder how you think about that.
That's one of the best questions I've ever had. That's awesome. You know what? Yes. And you just answered it for me in a way. I mean, first of all, what an honor. Thank you so much for saying that, because I feel very, as an artist who goes into academia, of course, there's always, there's an imposter. I don't know if you have imposter syndrome. There's imposter syndrome for all of us.
Sure, right.
But especialmente, somebody like me who, on a good day, I feel very confident about the fact that as a songwriter, I've always theorized, right? My storytelling is a form of theorization, right? We know this from our fields. that testimonio, for example, is an important tool, right? And to me, songs are like a kinds of like a testimony, right? A way of getting an audience or people to sort of connect with an idea or ideas, with a triumph, aphorism, struggle, right? All of these things that go along with music. So it's no accident that, and in my case, as I noticed and I got more and more into academia, or I was encouraged by other academics who would always interview us as a singer songwriter for Quetzal. I don't know how many interviews I would do a year with academics that would write about our music,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And they would start their chapter, right? And they'd start their chapter with
I've
lyrics.
read chapters. Yeah, I've certainly come across Quetzal in academic writing. Yeah.
Exactly. So folks would quote a lyric or they would quote an interview, right? And so by Quetzal Flores or myself, and or even if it wasn't our own music, it was somebody else's lyrics, right? Lyricism is an important way into avenue into a greater sort of theoretical framework, right? Or supports it well. So that's not so far-fetched, right? But I think that in my case, I really felt like I couldn't tell the theory without really going into how I related to it, right? And I think those examples really came from people before me, right? Anzaldúa, Bell Hooks, Barbara Christian, right? Audre Lorde, like all the storytellers and artists slash writers that begin to sort of come from, they start at the root, right? And the root is the personal embodied experience. And because so many of our scholars in our fields have given credence to that, it was a less daunting task for me to have to go into that.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that I had a very supportive dissertation committee who knew who I was and what I was coming in with, and that music and art or creative writing, so to speak, or testimonio was going to be an important part of how I told the story. So I think that there were times where I would feel really self-conscious in writing the book and thinking, okay, enough about me. Let me go into like what I see in the story. Okay, now let me go back to the story. Too much theory, like it. After a while, it was like, okay, I'm getting too heady. Let me go back, And so I'd go back and forth, back and forth. But when I read treaties or books that are super high end theory and just like, I'm so impressed with that. I don't feel like I can do that. So this is my way, I think, of just sort of going back and forth in ways that feel comfortable to me and honest in my voice and what I'm able to do with the skill sets I have, and what I feel honest. I try not to perform too much, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the way that the book is organized, you're sort of telling us your story, even as you're sort of making these sort of big, putting out these big ideas about what you call music under capitalism, which I love that sort of phrasing of it. And then also talking to us about cafes and community centers and the ways in which those spaces open themselves up for artists. Is that the way you were sort of thinking it up as you were writing this dissertation? Talk to us about that kind of evolutionary process of making the book and getting to that point.
Well, I think the methods happened for me first, right? Like we were already engaging in these methods in grad school. And even in grad school, I think that, when you have to, I knew that I wanted to write about my time period, the Chicanos in the 90s, and that movement, Chicano artist activist movement in the 90s. And nobody has really written extensively about it, right? And it's peripherally written about. I can think of a handful of people that have sort of mentioned it, but really people that have been mostly preoccupied with 80s, 70s, the canon, right?
Right.
Very
Exactly.
important canon, very important. And I always thought about us, not us as Quetzal, but also Quetzal and other artists of my generation and people that have dedicated their lives to art and music, but in these very different ways, right? They didn't necessarily do only their careers. They've stayed connected to this process-based work that I talk about specifically about the kind of work that we do, but there are many others that I could have gone into and just snowballed from there, right? The book could have been a lot longer, but I think that what I try to do is just sort of lay the foundation, because I've been, publishing articles here and there about other things, for tenure's sake. But I feel like I hadn't really given a foundational work, like the change of music conception over time, how the roots affected, and when I finally experienced something different, how transformative it was for me. And so I kind of worked my way backwards, I would say. I started off with the methods and thinking like, why is this so important? Why is this effective? Why are communities responding to this in these important ways? Why is there an entire community that has grown out of fandango? Why is this so important, right? So working my way back, and as we're studying, learning all these theories, and almost everything I learned in the courses that I took, there was always an example, a lived experience that I had. So I think that dissertation was written backwards. And then I had to really signal to that very beginning, that first time, the memories I had with my dad, how his presence has affected all of us in the family, how some of us are still recovering from the kind of trauma he inflicted on us, but also how these new ways of being have been liberating, how my son is a totally different kind of musician than I was raised to be, He's a very well-rounded. He knows, he has two ethics in his mind, and value systems, and he understands them both clearly, right? And his world is so different than mine was,
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I answered the
No,
question.
you did. It's great. And one of the things that comes through quite clearly in the book is your sort of evolution with these ideas, number one. And I'm wondering, as you're thinking about whether or not you're going to go into music because of the experiences at home and all of that, I want to sort of go back and take a different angle. When did you know that PhD work in academia were going to be the track that you were going to take? And why would you, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I wonder when that came, because it sounds to me like you're in the midst of performances, and you talk about in the book doing gigs for community organizations and different groups all the time. And I'm putting two and two together, thinking about, well, you're also in grad school during this time. So anyway, it's just sort of a jumble question in terms of how did you think about academic work, how you got to that, and then how did you balance it all out, I suppose.
I feel like it's been such an organic process for me. I think, like a lot of people, I mean, that I think get to academia, it is a question of stability, right? There had been so many years gigging and doing the tour thing that we had never really paid into Social Security. Not like it's gonna matter anymore. Who knows, right? Shit's being chipped away real quick. But I realized, there's nothing like having a child to sort of kind of say, oh my God, like, what am I gonna do? And especially when the child begins to ask in a green room as he's nursing, and he says, ¿Qué estamos haciendo aquí? Me quiero ir a mi casa. Me quiero ir a mi casa a dormir, and a dormir en mi cama, he said, and I remember thinking to myself, looking at him, and then I look at Quetzal, and I was like, ¿Cómo ves? But I'd already been thinking about it. I love school. I'm a kind of a nerd in the sense that I love to talk about music. I like to, my partner and I are always nerding out on things, anything, politics, rhythms, it's part of, like, a lot of us, I'm a creative being. And so any kind of talk around that kind of stuff is transformative for me. And I love dabbling in it. But up until then, like I said, I had so much contact with different academics, that over the years, there were, as we'd have interviews and we'd talk, and in one of the tours, I had the wonderful Olga Najera Ramirez, WC's Santa Cruz, ask me. She was putting an anthology together for dance, and she said, what you do on the tarima which is the wooden platform I dance on as a member of Quetzal, she's like, is it traditional folklorico, or what is it that you do? I was like, no, it's kind of a mixture, because I studied Afro-Cuban music and dance, and music and dance of Ghana, and folklorico. I said, so it's kind of a little bit of everything. She's like, that sounds fascinating. Can you write something about that? I'm publishing a book, an anthology, but I'm not promising that the art, it'll go in there. I just want to hear what you're thinking. And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, I love to write. I've kept journals forever. And so I started writing something up, and then I'd send it to her. On tour, I'd write in a book, type it up, send it. So we went back and forth like that. And at the end, she said, you know what, we could publish this, we should do this. And if you wanted to, you can use this as a piece to get to grad school. And I thought, wow, grad school. And I mentioned it to Quetzal, and he was like, yeah, sure. He's always been very supportive. And I thought to myself, how would we do that? And he's like, yeah, why not? At some point, Tandino's going to have to be in stationary. We're going to have to start him in school, and might as well. We'd been touring since he was like 3 years old. I mean, since he was born and into 3 years old. So I knew there was going to be a time where it was his schedule, not mine, right? Or ours. And so that's kind of how it timed it out. I applied to grad school and for a Fulbright, and I received the Fulbright, and grad school said, go ahead and take it and come back in a year. They kind of deferred my enrollment, and I was like, that was the best of both worlds. We went to Veracruz, lived there for 9 months, came back for the summer in LA, and then we moved to Seattle, Washington, and we were there for about almost 6 years. And my advisor knew, and I even met my advisor at a gig.
Okay.
Our kids were playing together, Michelle Habel Payan. It was a Malks gig. We were playing for Malks. It wasn't even Quetzal. It was like a trio or a quartet. And my son was playing in the grass. Her daughter came, and they were playing together, and that's how we met. And I started talking to her. I've been thinking about going back to school, and she's like, come to Washington. And so that's how I got to the University of Washington. And before then, I used to run an after-school arts program. I taught fifth kindergarten through high school, on and off as a substitute teacher for LAUSD. And the way teachers there were treated was horrible.
Yeah.
Micromanaged. There was no creative sense for the teacher unless they were super senior, like teachers. And I just realized, like, I love to teach, but I don't want to spend my time, I don't want my hands tied as I'm teaching. And I also don't want to be micromanaged by any, especially LAUSD, right?
Yeah.
And their system. And so I was very discouraged by, although I love teaching kids, it just wasn't for me. And so I knew that I wanted all of the things that come with it, right? The summers off, writing is something, talking about music. If I could talk about music and still live in the world of music somehow, why not, while my son's growing up. And then when he gets older and just leaves, then le vale su madre, well, then, then I get to, I'll start doing other things again, I thought. And I really didn't think I'd get a tenure track position. I didn't think I'd ever get tenure. Like, it was really crazy. I feel very lucky. It's a lot of fun for me. It's just, I would say that at times it's as much fun as it is to be on stage and to play and write music. It's another way of expression, I think. It's very expressive for me. And academia is a lot like the record industry, just FYI.
Okay.
Hey, think about it. We perform.
That's right.
Right? We have to. That's right. We have to promote our own stuff. Like, we have to, like, it's the same thing, And it's like, you have to write a book, but you don't get paid for it.
Right.
It's a lot. It's the same market system in a way, right? So it makes sense. But there are other things that I think are we could use to our advantage. And some of those things is the kind of flexibility we get and things. And I was thinking of my family, I'm thinking of my kid, I'm thinking of all the things that I want to keep, being there for him and providing until he doesn't need me anymore. And then, si no me gusta, I would have left a long time ago, I could do other stuff, but I enjoy it.
Good. When in the book, there's a lot certainly going on. And I wonder if for our listeners, what are some key takeaways that you would like for them to really, think about? I mean, I know that there are academics that will certainly consider assigning your book. It's a fabulous book. You should definitely assign it. Great theoretical insight, wonderful storytelling. what are some of the 2 or 3 takeaways that you want people to grab from the book? Whatever ideas that you want them to take.
I want us to realize the depths of how capitalism has affected how we think about ourselves as creative beings. You know, we know it's a social institution as much as it is an economic one, right? And I feel like we don't think enough about the social part, and particularly how it has altered communities in really deep ways.
Mhm.
Our entire social fabric has been overdetermined by transactions, you know, transactional relationships, and you most for with rare occasions, most of how we think about music is something we buy or we sell, right? But rarely do we think about music, art, and culture as just being in community with others, where there is no transaction, economic transaction at all taking place. It's just the way we spend time with each other. I want us to think back to those ways. And if we don't have those, if you don't have those at the ready, I think it's important enough for us to invent them,
Yeah.
because people have done it before in our generations. Hip hop and cipher. From the cipher, hip hop is born, and then the industry took it, and everybody thinks it's just hip hop. But hip hop came with, you know, like the cipher, MCing, turntablism, right, and graffiti art. Like, granted, gente pobre, right, like
Yeah.
super disenfranchised, right? And then the industry comes along and takes it, but they're not the ones that make the money, right?
Right.
So we know that capital can sell anything. They'll come in and they'll do that, but that's the danger, right? I think that we need to create participatory music and dance practices, or reinvent them, or reach back into our cultural legacies as people, as human beings, to bring them back into the forefront, to get people to do this. I think if we had more of that, we would have less mental illness,
Mm.
less depression, more communication between communities, more dialogue. We'd be better neighbors, perhaps. I'm not saying that it doesn't come with problems. No, even in your own family, there's never just harmony, right? But I do think that there'd be a different way of just being in community with people, and I think it could really solve a lot of our problems. And I think that for us, and especially some of the methods that I talk about, like Fandango, for example, it becomes a kind of social movement, where we don't have to just think about social movement as the picket line and the
Yeah.
boycott and the marches, these things that extract so much energy from us, right? They also give us energy, but for the most part, it's very taxing and those are methods that we use to put out fires, right? And we need to react to these things, right? But I think we also need to spend our time building community around these practices that are generative, right? That aren't just taking and sucking energy from us, right? We need to build that world we want to see when all of this else fails, or when government fails us, right? As we have seen them do for everybody else, for so many people, Black people, poor, disenfranchised communities in general, right? Look at Katrina. Look at, women and children in cages. Look at, like, government is, that's not, they're not going to save us. I think that we need to build that world, that begin to really build it, like not just react all the time, but like really build that world. And I think that music is always at the center of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Music has always been important to us, and in these specific ways, and we need to put that muscle memory back into our spirit.
Thank you so much for that. That's certainly, I think, a lot to think about, and I think it relates a lot to. I mean, I'm not a musician, but an academic, and the way that I sort of the way that you describe the record industry and academia in those sorts of ways. One of the things that I try to remind myself is something you just said right now, which is, and you say in the book, is redefining whatever thought process we have around success. What does it mean? When you're there at the well-organized, as you say, Grammy Awards, you're still trying to get health insurance. You're still trying to find gigs, and you're still trying to see, how you're going to make payments that are going to come down the road and so forth. And so those I think are certainly inspiring things to think about. The book is Chicano Artivistas, Music, Community, and Transborder Tactics in East Los Angeles, published by University of Texas Press this year in 2020. Professor Gonzalez, I have one more question for you. Today, we in Texas, I'm sitting here in Texas, in Central Texas, and today is the first day of early voting. There are lines, as you can imagine, everywhere. And there's also, I think, a sense of hope and optimism, even in the midst of kind of political chaos that we live in. I wonder, with all the good work that you have done, what is it that keeps you going, and what is it that gives you hope?
Mm. Well, there's nothing like being in community with people, and you know, in my own music communities that I belong to, my family, you know, my students, they're amazing, the ways in which they think. Um, and although there isn't always harmony in the community or in the family or, you know, my students, um, sometimes I, you know, I wonder where our youth is going to take us sometimes. You know, I still believe that um, that there's a lot of good people out there, you know. So I feel like music for me has always been that thing, and maybe that's something that my dad always wanted, you know. Maybe that's something he saw, but he was just blinded by all of these other things.
Mhm.
Whenever we feel sad around here, or we have a moment when the pandemic first started, and to this very day, we'll just sit around here and we'll play together, my son, my husband, and myself. We just jam out for like an hour and 30 minutes, and not to record, not to play for, you know, online gigs or anything like that. We're just sort of playing, and we're working things out, or we're, you know, I write a verso, or, you know, I think music will always be that expressive thing that always, you know, is cathartic,
Mhm.
which makes space in my heart and in my mind to keep that fight up, you know. And I'm going to vote, but I also think it's really important for us, after we finish voting, to do that other work, that
Yeah.
social work that we really, really need to do. I think that's where we're, you know, that's what allowed the kinds of idiocy that's in the, you know, in government right now. I can't even believe what we're living through sometimes. And but there wasn't enough dialogue. There wasn't enough, you know, on the ground work, and that's the stuff we need to keep doing.
Yeah. Great. The book again is Chicano Artivistas, Music, Community, and Transborder Tactics in East Los Angeles. I'm going to look straight into that camera and say, you've got to go get this book, published by the University of Texas Press, 2020. Assign it. If you're a historian, anthropologist, whatever, musicologist, whatever kind of field you're in, this book is going to fit, because it speaks to our greater humanity and it tells wonderful stories. And really, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, it's an inspiring book. You finish reading the book feeling ready to go and do the things that are life-giving. And so thank you for putting this out into the world and sharing this with all of us. Professor Gonzalez is also, as many of you know, the lead singer of the Grammy Award-winning band Quetzal. So check them out, as I was earlier today, on lots of really great YouTube videos and things are out there. So thank you
Oh,
for all the wonderful work you do.
thank you so much. Thank you for having me once again, Felipe. Thank you so much. And I really, again, thank you for having this platform and for discussing all of our work.
Great. All right.